The first time Ethan Cross heard about The Last Thing You Ever See, he dismissed it as another desperate internet stunt. He had made a career out of debunking these so-called digital horrors, cursed phone numbers, haunted live streams, websites that erased your existence. Every few months, a new urban legend would rise, sweeping through social media like wildfire. People wanted to be scared. They craved the rush of staring into the abyss, knowing deep down it was all just a game. This time, however, something felt different. The story started on obscure horror forums before creeping onto mainstream platforms. TikTok, Reddit, and Twitter were ablaze with the same eerie warnings. Don't look at the image for more than 10 seconds. Don't think about it. Don't acknowledge it. If you do, it sees you too. At first, the challenge seemed like typical internet hysteria. Videos of people staring at a black and white, heavily distorted image flooded social media. The reactions varied, some laughed, some shuddered, but a few stared too long. Those were the ones who came back days later, disheveled and frantic, whispering about something lurking in their periphery. Their updates grew erratic. Then they stopped altogether. Ethan scrolled through the subreddit r/thelastthing as he sipped his third cup of coffee. The community was already in full panic mode. u/hexeduser19, I swear I see it. It doesn't move. It just watches. I don't know what to do. u/vanishedboy, this is not a joke. My brother saw it and now he's missing. The cops won't listen. Don't stare at the image. Please. u/lastglimpse13, it's in the mirror. It's in the goddamn mirror. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. The internet never ran out of creativity. He opened a new draft on his blog, Debunked, ready to tear the trend apart. The Last Thing You Ever See. Internet hoax or viral marketing? His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He'd written this kind of article before, exposing ARGs, fake supernatural conspiracies, and internet mysteries. But something gnawed at him this time. He pulled up one of the supposed cursed images, just a grainy, high-contrast mess of black and white pixels. Squinting, he could vaguely make out the shape of something. A figure, a tall, stretched-out shadow, almost humanoid, standing just at the edge of the frame. His heart stuttered for half a second before he laughed at himself. Jesus, Ethan, get a grip. Yet, his curiosity got the best of him. All right, he muttered, setting a timer on his phone for 10 seconds. The screen glowed in the dim light of his apartment. He leaned in, locking eyes with the distorted figure. 10 seconds. 9, 8, a flicker just at the edge of his vision. 7, 6, a feeling like someone was standing behind him. 5, 4, his breath hitched. The pixels on the screen, were they shifting? 3, 2, 1. The timer buzzed, making him jump. His hand flew to his chest, feeling his heartbeat thunder against his ribs. He shut his laptop with a nervous chuckle. What the hell was that? For a long moment, he sat in silence. The apartment felt heavier, the shadows in the corners a little too deep. Shaking his head, he pushed away from his desk. He wasn't going to let a dumb internet challenge get under his skin. He'd post his article in the morning, and by next week, this whole thing would be forgotten. As he turned off his desk lamp and walked toward his bedroom, he failed to notice something shift in the darkness behind him. Something watching, something waiting, and now it had seen him too. Ethan awoke to the sound of his phone vibrating violently against his nightstand. The glow of the screen illuminated his darkened bedroom, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Disoriented, he groggily reached for the device, barely registering the time. 3:12 a.m. A text notification flashed across the screen. Unknown number. Why did you look? Ethan sat up, his drowsiness fading into an icy alertness. He stared at the message, his pulse quickening. He didn't recognize the number. His first instinct was that it was some prank, maybe someone from the subreddit messing with him. Before he could respond, another message arrived. Unknown number, you shouldn't have looked. A shiver crawled down his spine. He glanced around his dark room, the lingering unease from earlier creeping back. The apartment felt colder than usual, and an unnatural stillness hung in the air. With a scoff, he threw the phone onto the nightstand. "Nice try, asshole," he muttered under his breath, rolling back over. He shut his eyes, but something didn't feel right. It was the silence. The city outside was never this quiet. No distant sirens, no hum of passing cars, just an oppressive, unnatural stillness. It pressed against his eardrums, making him hyper-aware of his own breathing. And then, a creak. His eyes snapped open. The sound came from the far corner of his bedroom. Slowly, he turned his head, his breath catching in his throat. A shape loomed in the darkness. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the street lamp outside. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized something was wrong. The figure was too tall, too thin. It stood motionless, its edges blurred, as if it didn't quite belong to this world. Ethan's stomach twisted into a tight knot. His rational mind screamed that it was nothing, but every instinct in his body told him otherwise. He reached for his bedside lamp, fingers fumbling for the switch. The moment the light flicked on, the shadow was gone. His chest heaved. He blinked rapidly, scanning the corner where the figure had been. The room was empty, just his dresser, the bookshelf, and the floor-length mirror reflecting his pale, startled expression. "Jesus," he exhaled, rubbing his face. "You're losing it, man." He swung his legs over the side of the bed, standing on shaky legs. His throat felt dry, his skin clammy. Maybe this whole cursed image thing had gotten under his skin more than he wanted to admit. Deciding he needed water, he left the bedroom and made his way to the kitchen. The hardwood floors creaked under his weight as he passed through the dimly lit apartment. As he reached for a glass from the cabinet, a faint tapping sound made him freeze. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the living room window. Ethan turned slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. His apartment was on the 4th floor. Swallowing hard, he stepped forward, each movement deliberate and slow. The window faced the alleyway between buildings, offering nothing but a view of the brick wall opposite. He approached cautiously, peering out into the darkness. Nothing. Just as he was about to turn away, a face appeared in the glass. A grotesque, warped reflection of his own face, but wrong. Its mouth too wide, its eyes too deep. Ethan stumbled back with a strangled gasp, knocking over the glass in his hand. It shattered against the floor. His breath came in short, panicked bursts as he scrambled to turn on every light in the apartment. When he looked back at the window, the face was gone. His phone vibrated again. He hesitated before picking it up. Unknown number. "You see it now, don't you?" Ethan's hands trembled as he typed his response. "Ethan, who is this?" 3 dots appeared. Then, "Unknown number, you let it in." A cold dread settled in his stomach. Somewhere behind him, the floor creaked. He wasn't alone. Ethan didn't turn around. His breath hitched in his throat as he stood frozen in his kitchen. His phone clenched so tightly his knuckles ached. The message on the screen blurred as his pulse pounded in his ears. "You let it in." The words repeated in his mind like a whisper in the dark. Behind him, the soft creak of the floorboards came again. Slow, deliberate. Something was in his apartment. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to move, to run, to do something, but fear had turned his limbs to stone. He forced himself to take a shallow breath. 1, 2, 3. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, he spun around, his hands flying up defensively. Nothing. His apartment was empty. The dim kitchen light flickered overhead, casting long, shifting shadows along the walls. His living room stretched before him, the furniture still and untouched. The front door remained bolted. His bedroom door stood slightly ajar, but there was no sign of anyone. And yet, the air felt wrong. Thick, heavy, like something unseen was lingering just out of sight, watching. Ethan swallowed hard. His rational mind fought to take control. "You're overtired," he whispered to himself. "You've been reading too many horror stories." His phone buzzed again. "Unknown number. That won't help you." Ethan's breath hitched. His eyes darted around the room, searching for a camera or some sign that he was being pranked. He strode toward the front door, yanking it open and glancing into the empty hallway. Nothing but silence. His fingers trembled as he typed back. "Ethan, who are you?" The reply came instantly. "Unknown number, you already know." His stomach twisted. He needed to get out. He didn't care if this was a hoax, a stalker, or his own mind playing tricks on him. He couldn't stay here. Grabbing his keys and jacket, he moved toward the door, his pace quick and desperate. His hand gripped the doorknob, but the moment he twisted it, a shadow passed by the hallway mirror. His blood ran cold. The reflection was not his own. The figure in the mirror was taller, stretched unnaturally, its limbs thin and elongated. Its face was warped, hollowed-out eyes locked onto his. And worst of all, it was standing directly behind him. Ethan didn't think. He lunged away from the mirror, nearly tripping over himself as he stumbled backward into the living room. His breath came in ragged gasps as he dared to glance back. The reflection was gone. The room was empty, but the feeling remained. It was still here. His phone vibrated again. Hands shaking, he lifted it. "Unknown number. You can't leave. It's already inside you." Ethan let out a strangled breath. He needed help. Without hesitating, he scrolled through his contacts and dialed the only person who might believe him. The phone rang once, twice, then a groggy voice answered. "Jesus, Ethan, do you know what time it is?" "Mark," Ethan gasped. "I need you to come over. Now." There was a pause. "Dude, are you okay? Just please. I don't want to be alone right now." Mark sighed. All right. I'll be there in 15. Ethan exhaled, his pulse still erratic. He backed away from the mirror, keeping every light in the apartment on. He wouldn't let himself look at the dark corners. Wouldn't acknowledge the feeling that something was just out of sight. He just had to hold on until Mark arrived. But as he sat on the couch, gripping his phone like a lifeline, something on the TV screen caught his eye. The screen was off, and yet, in the reflection of the black screen, there were two silhouettes. One was his, the other was standing right behind him. Ethan bolted from the couch, his pulse hammering in his ears. His chest rose and fell in sharp, ragged breaths as he backed against the far wall. His eyes locked onto the television screen. The reflection was gone. The living room was empty, but the feeling remained thick, suffocating, like unseen eyes pressing down on him from every angle. His phone slipped from his sweaty grip and clattered onto the floor. "Stay calm," he told himself. "Mark is on his way. Just hold on." But every second stretched unbearably long. The silence of his apartment wasn't just an absence of noise. It felt deliberate, as if the world outside had been muted. He forced himself to move, pacing back and forth, rubbing his arms as a cold sweat clung to his skin. Then, a knock at the door. Ethan nearly jumped out of his skin. He turned toward the sound, heart thudding with desperate relief. "Mark?" he called, already moving toward the door. No answer. A second knock, louder this time. Ethan hesitated. Something about it felt off. The rhythm was too slow, too calculated. His hand hovered over the lock. "Mark?" he repeated. "That better be you, man." Silence. Then, 3 more knocks, perfectly spaced, unnaturally precise. Ethan's breath hitched. He glanced at his phone on the floor, but before he could grab it, another message buzzed in. "Unknown number. Don't open it." His stomach clenched. The doorknob rattled. A quiet, dragging breath came from the other side, slow and deliberate. Ethan stumbled back, his mind racing. Was this Mark? Was it something else? He squeezed his eyes shut. Think. His phone vibrated again. "Unknown number. It's not your friend." Then, from outside the door, a whisper, low, warped, almost amused. "Ethan." His entire body turned to ice. That was his own voice. Something was mimicking him. Ethan's breathing came fast and shallow. He didn't move. He didn't dare to. The doorknob twisted violently. The wood creaked as if something were pressing against it, testing its limits. Then, the knocking stopped. A long silence followed. Ethan barely breathed, ears straining for any sound. The air felt heavier, as if something had just left, or was still waiting, unseen. Then, from outside, footsteps echoed down the hall. Soft, measured, moving away. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself forward, snatching his phone off the floor. He immediately called Mark. It rang. Once, twice, then, "Yo, I'm almost there." Mark's voice came through, casual and groggy. Traffic was crap. Be there in 5. Ethan's throat went dry. The thing at his door, that wasn't Mark. His fingers tightened around the phone. "Mark," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever you do, don't park out front. Don't come up alone. Something's..." A sharp click. The line went dead. Ethan stared at the screen. The call had dropped. No. His stomach churned with dread. He tried calling back, straight to voicemail. A sudden chill filled the room. He wasn't alone. Slowly, he turned back toward the dark hallway leading to his bedroom. The lights flickered. A shape stood at the end of the hall. Tall, distorted, watching. Then, it moved. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The figure at the end of the hall didn't move like a person. Its limbs stretched too long, its body tilting unnaturally as it leaned forward. The dim, flickering light only made it worse. Shadows clinging to its frame like something trying to pull it back, as if it didn't fully belong in this world. Then it took a step. Ethan stumbled backward, his pulse pounding. The apartment suddenly felt too small. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The figure took another step, slow and deliberate. And then it spoke. Ethan. The voice was his own. A near-perfect imitation, but off. Like a recording played slightly too slow, each syllable just a fraction distorted. Ethan felt his mind slipping. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. He forced his shaking hands to move, grabbing the nearest thing. A lamp from the side table. His fingers clenched around its base as he raised it, ready to strike. "Stay back," he choked out. The thing stopped. It cocked its head as if studying him. Then, a smile. Why, unnatural, stretching too far across its face. Ethan threw the lamp. The crash was deafening as glass and ceramic shattered against the hallway wall. But when he looked back, the figure was gone. Silence. The lights flickered once more, then steadied. Ethan's breaths came in sharp, erratic bursts. He forced himself to move, inching toward the hallway. His heart pounded with every step. The hallway was empty. The door to his bedroom hung open, darkness spilling from within. His phone buzzed in his hand. With a trembling thumb, he looked at the screen. Unknown number. It's learning. Ethan nearly dropped the phone. Then, a loud knock at the front door. He jumped, a strangled sound escaping his throat. Another knock, quick, sharp, and normal this time. "Ethan? Dude, open up." It was Mark. Ethan rushed to the door, hesitating only for a second before unlocking it and yanking it open. Mark stood there, looking half annoyed, half worried. "Man, you look like hell. What's going on?" Ethan didn't answer. He grabbed Mark's arm and pulled him inside, slamming the door shut behind them. Mark blinked. "Okay. Ow. Mind telling me what the hell?" "I saw it," Ethan gasped. "It was in here. It spoke to me. It looked like..." His voice caught in his throat. "It looked like me." Mark frowned, taking in Ethan's shaking hands, the overturned furniture, the broken lamp. "All right, you're scaring the shit out of me right now. What the hell are you talking about?" Ethan's head was spinning. He dragged Mark toward the couch, still gripping his arm like a lifeline. "The cursed image," he breathed. "It's real. I saw something, and now it won't." His phone buzzed again. Mark snatched it before Ethan could, glancing at the screen. "Unknown number. It's in the room with you." Mark paled. "What the..." Then, from the dark hallway, a voice. "Ethan?" Both of them froze. The blood drained from Ethan's face, because the voice that called out sounded just like Mark. The real Mark, sitting beside him, stiffened. His eyes slowly met Ethan's, wide with terror. A shadow shifted at the edge of the hallway. Something stepped forward. Ethan couldn't breathe, because standing there at the entrance to the darkened hall was Mark. Perfect, identical copy. The real Mark let out a sharp breath beside him. "What the?" The other Mark smiled. Too wide, unnatural, like it was learning. And then, in Ethan's voice, it spoke. "You let me in." Ethan's body locked up, his mind screaming at him to move, to do something, but he couldn't. The other Mark stood at the entrance of the hallway, wearing an eerie, stretched smile. Every inch of it looked exactly like his friend. Same clothes, same messy dark hair, same wary expression. Except for the eyes. They were too dark, too empty. The real Mark, still beside Ethan on the couch, gripped his arm. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Dude, what the hell is that?" The imposter tilted its head, mimicking the exact way Mark had just spoken. "What the hell is that?" it repeated, but the tone was just a little off, warped, like an echo through a broken speaker. Ethan's stomach churned. His hands were shaking. "I don't." His voice cracked. "I don't know." The thing took a step closer. Mark shot up from the couch, dragging Ethan with him. "Nope, nope, we're not doing this." His voice was sharp with panic. "We're getting the hell out of here." He grabbed Ethan's wrist and yanked him toward the door. The imposter moved too, mirroring them. Ethan fumbled with the lock. His fingers were slick with sweat, trembling so badly he could barely turn it. Come on," he muttered under his breath. Then, behind them, a laugh, low, amused, too familiar. Ethan turned his head just enough to see. The imposter wasn't moving anymore. It was grinning. It lifted a hand, palm up, like it was waiting for something. Then, the lights went out. Total darkness. Ethan's breath hitched. The room swallowed them whole, every shadow stretching wider, deeper. A scraping sound filled the silence. Something moving, shifting, getting closer. Ethan grabbed Mark's arm, his fingers digging into the fabric of his jacket. "Mark, I know." Mark fumbled with his phone, its dim screen barely lighting up his face. But in that faint glow, something loomed behind Mark. Ethan's stomach dropped. A tall, dark outline, standing impossibly close. Too close. Ethan couldn't speak, couldn't warn him, because in the dim light, Mark's face changed. For a single, horrifying second, the familiar features melted into something else. Distorted. Wrong. Ethan's blood turned to ice. His mind screamed, "Run." Then, a whisper directly in his ear. "You picked the wrong one." His entire body jerked. The lights snapped back on. Ethan was still gripping Mark's arm, but the other Mark was gone. The hallway was empty. No footprints, no shadows, like it had never been there at all. Ethan's breath came in quick, panicked gasps. His eyes darted to Mark, his real friend, the one standing beside him. Mark was just as pale, just as shaken. What the hell was that? His voice was hoarse, frantic. Ethan could barely speak. His throat felt raw. "I don't know." His phone buzzed. Slowly, he looked down. "Unknown number, you let it in." His heart stuttered. Another message immediately after. "Unknown number, are you sure you left with the right one?" Ethan's grip on his phone tightened. His whole body went cold. His gaze snapped back to Mark, his best friend. Or was he? Mark frowned. "Dude, why are you looking at me like that?" Ethan swallowed. He couldn't answer, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if the person standing beside him was really Mark at all. Ethan's skin crawled as he stared at Mark, or what he thought was Mark. His best friend stood there, confused, his brows furrowed. "Dude? Seriously, what's wrong?" Ethan's grip on his phone tightened, his breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. "You let it in. Are you sure you left with the right one?" His mind raced. The imposter had been right there. It had looked exactly like Mark. Same voice, same posture, same damn hoodie. But now it was gone. And this Mark was still here. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. "Ethan?" Mark's voice was softer now, laced with genuine concern. He took a step forward. Ethan stepped back. Mark stopped, his jaw clenched. "Okay, what the hell is going on?" Ethan could barely find his voice. "How do I know you're real?" Mark's eyes widened. "Are you kidding me? Answer me." Mark let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Dude, it's me. I came here because you called me freaking out. Remember?" He motioned around the wrecked apartment. "I've been with you this whole time. You really think?" He stopped, something dark flickering across his expression. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. Then Mark did something that made his blood turn to ice. He smiled, not a normal smile, a slow, creeping grin, just wide enough to make Ethan's stomach churn. And then, Mark laughed, low, amused, just like the thing had laughed before the lights went out. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. His legs nearly gave out. No. Relax, Mark said, his voice suddenly back to normal. He shook his head, the eerie smile gone. "Jesus, Ethan, you look like you just saw a ghost." Ethan could barely speak. His whole body screamed at him to run. But Mark just sighed. "You know what? Screw this. If you're gonna act like I'm some kind of monster, I'm out." He turned toward the door. Ethan's breath caught. What if this really was Mark? What if he was letting his friend walk away, just because of some sick mind game? But what if it wasn't him? His head pounded. He had no way of knowing, no way of being sure. Mark pulled open the door. "See you later, man," he muttered. Then, Ethan saw it, just for a split second. A glitch, like a flicker in reality. For less than a heartbeat, Mark's shadow on the floor didn't match his movement. It lagged behind, and Ethan knew that wasn't Mark. It was still here, a scream stuck in his throat. His limbs refused to move as Mark's copy stepped through the doorway and vanished into the night. The door clicked shut, and Ethan was alone. His phone buzzed. Hand shaking, he looked down. Unknown number. It doesn't need to pretend anymore. Ethan's body collapsed against the wall. His mind screamed at him. What did that mean? What the hell did that mean? Then, a knock. Slow, rhythmic. At the window, Ethan's stomach plummeted. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, and something was knocking from the outside. Ethan's breath hitched. The knocking was slow, deliberate, 3 steady taps against the glass. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape, nothing to stand on. But something was out there. The phone in his hand vibrated again. Unknown number. Open up. Ethan's stomach twisted. His trembling fingers hovered over the screen, then typed back. "Ethan, no." For a moment, nothing. Just silence. Then, tap, tap, tap. Louder this time. Ethan forced himself to look. The blinds were partially closed, but through the narrow slats, he saw a shape. A silhouette. Humanoid. But wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Its fingers were pressed against the glass, long, stretching too far down. And then, it moved. Not like a person. More like a badly animated puppet. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps. His body screamed at him to run, to hide, to do something. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number, you looked. Ethan's chest locked up. Tap, tap, tap. More urgent now. His pulse hammered in his ears. He forced his feet to move, stumbling backward away from the window. Then, the knocking stopped. A terrible silence filled the room. Ethan's phone vibrated. His stomach twisted into knots. Unknown number. Check the mirror. His entire body froze. No way. His eyes darted toward the bathroom door. The mirror inside was large. Too large. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came again, but not from the window this time. It was coming from inside the bathroom. Ethan's blood ran cold. Something was in there, and it wanted him to look. Ethan stood frozen in place. The knocking from the bathroom mirror was slow and measured, 3 deliberate taps. as if something on the other side was waiting. His phone vibrated again. Unknown number. You need to see. No, he didn't. He didn't need to see anything. But his body moved anyway. Step by step, he edged toward the bathroom. Every instinct in him screamed stop, turn back, leave. But he didn't. His hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. He pushed it open. The light inside flickered, just once, before stabilizing into a dim, sickly glow. The mirror was fogged over, obscuring his reflection. A brief, flickering hope lit in his chest. Maybe there was nothing there. But then, something moved behind the glass. His pulse slammed against his ribs. It wasn't just his reflection clearing up. It was something else. The fog lifted slowly, revealing himself, but not quite. The other Ethan in the mirror stood wrong. Shoulders too stiff, head tilted at an unnatural angle. And the eyes, not his, dark, too dark, empty. His stomach churned. The mirror Ethan lifted a hand, but Ethan hadn't moved. A crawling, suffocating dread crept over him. Then, the reflection grinned. A slow, unnatural stretch of the lips, curling too wide. Not possible. Ethan's breath hitched. He took a step back, but the reflection stepped forward. His stomach dropped. It wasn't copying him. It was moving on its own. His phone buzzed again, but he barely noticed. The reflection's lips moved. No sound came out, but Ethan understood. 2 words. Let me in. Ethan's heart pounded. He staggered back, slamming into the wall. Then, the mirror cracked. Not a single splintering break, but dozens of fractures spiraling out from where his reflection's hand pressed against the glass. Ethan's chest tightened. The cracks deepened, and the thing inside was coming through. The cracks in the mirror spread like veins of rot, splintering out in jagged lines. Ethan's breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. His back was pressed against the cold tile wall, his legs refusing to move. The reflection, his reflection, but not his, kept grinning. And then, it moved. Not just in the mirror. Outside of it, the fractured glass bulged outward, as if something was pushing through from the other side. Ethan's phone buzzed in his hand. He barely glanced at it, but the message was clear. Unknown number, run. His body obeyed before his brain did. He lunged for the bathroom door just as the mirror shattered. A sound like ice breaking over deep water filled the room. Something hit the floor behind him. Not glass, something solid, something alive. Ethan didn't look back. He sprinted through his apartment, his pulse hammering in his skull. The air felt wrong, thick, charged, heavy with something unseen. The lights in the hallway flickered wildly. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Don't look back. Ethan slammed into his front door. His fingers fumbled at the lock, his hands slick with sweat. Behind him, he heard it. A soft dragging sound, like bare feet on tile. It was coming. His breath hitched. Click. The lock turned. Ethan yanked the door open and bolted into the hallway. He didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't dare. He took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly stumbling in his desperation to get away. But as he reached the lobby, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. It's too late. The glass doors ahead reflected him. Except, it wasn't just him. There, standing directly behind him, was the thing that had come through the mirror. Too tall, too thin, a perfect, twisted copy of himself. Ethan's stomach plummeted. The reflection lifted a hand and waved. Then, the lights went out.